The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the quiet village. The streets, usually alive with the chatter of villagers, were unusually still today. A somber atmosphere had descended on the small, rural town as a funeral procession made its way toward the graveyard. The mourners walked slowly, their heads bowed in grief, each one carrying the weight of their loss in their hearts. At the front of the procession, leading the way through the narrow dirt path, was something no one had expected to see: a wolf. Its coat was thick and well kept, its eyes dark and soulful. The villagers stood still, watching the creature walk alongside the humans, its posture regal yet respectful. It didn't belong to anyone in the town, yet it moved with a sense of purpose, as if it too had been invited to this solemn occasion. The wolf's eyes locked onto the casket ahead, its gaze unwavering. It was clear that it wasn't here by chance. There was a deep connection between this creature and the man they were burying today, the man whose kindness had once saved this very wolf's life. No one knew exactly how the bond between the two had begun. The villagers had spoken of it in hushed tones over the years, but no one had truly understood the depth of the relationship. The man, Thomas, had been a gentle soul, loved by all in the village, always lending a hand to those in need. But one fateful day, while walking through the woods, Thomas had come across a wolf caught in a hunter's trap. Without hesitation, Thomas had freed the creature, treating its wounds and leaving it with enough food to survive. From that day on, the wolf had watched over him, following him quietly through the village, and sometimes even guarding his house at night. Now, as Thomas's body was laid to rest, the wolf stood at the edge of the grave, its posture regal and watchful. It was as if it understood what this moment meant. As the mourners gathered, whispering to one another, the wolf remained still, its attention solely focused on the grave. The villagers, some of whom had seen the wolf as an omen, couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. They had never seen the animal behave like this before. There was no fear in its eyes, only a quiet, respectful sadness. The bond between the two was something they would never fully understand, but in that moment, they knew it was something profound. As the final words were spoken and the casket was lowered into the ground, the wolf took one last, lingering look at the grave. It wasn't just any animal at a funeral. This was a creature whose life had been saved, and it was now here to honor the man who had given it a second chance at life. The villagers began to move away, their hearts heavy with the grief of losing a beloved member of their community. But as the crowd dispersed, the wolf remained. It stood vigil, as though waiting for something, its eyes never leaving the freshly turned earth. The village had started to empty out, the mourners slowly returning to their homes, leaving the graveyard quiet once more. The last rays of the sun stretched across the land, casting long shadows as the wolf remained at the edge of the grave, its eyes never straying from the freshly dug earth where Thomas had been laid to rest. Time seemed to stand still. The air was heavy with the weight of the moment, thick with sorrow and something deeper, something more profound. The wolf, though seemingly just a wild animal, had a presence that spoke to the hearts of anyone who had seen it. There was a loyalty in its gaze, an understanding that transcended species. This was no mere animal paying respects. This was a creature honoring a debt it could never repay. The villagers had always known the wolf to be silent, elusive, and untouchable. Yet here it was, standing its ground by Thomas's grave, its loyalty unbroken. It was as if the animal understood the importance of this final farewell. It knew what it meant to lose someone important, someone who had given it life, and in return, it would stand vigil until it could no longer bear the grief. And then, as the last of the light began to fade from the sky, the wolf did something unexpected. It stepped forward. At first, the villagers thought it was leaving, that it had simply stood its ground out of some unspoken respect. But no, the wolf moved closer to the grave, its paws light on the soft earth. As it reached the edge of the freshly covered dirt, the wolf stopped. It lowered its head, almost in reverence, as if acknowledging the finality of the moment. And then, with a swift but deliberate motion, it circled the grave 3 times. The villagers who had gathered in the distance to watch the solemn scene unfold stood frozen. They didn't speak, not daring to interrupt the sacred moment. The wolf's behavior was unlike anything they had ever seen. It wasn't a mere act of mourning, it was a ritual. The wolf was performing a ritual, as if to seal the bond between them in the only way it knew how. After circling the grave 3 times, the wolf stopped once again. It turned its head to the wind, its nose rising to the sky, and howled, a sound that sent a shiver down the spines of the onlookers. The howl was mournful, raw, and full of emotion, the kind of sound only an animal who had known loss could make. It was as if the wolf was calling to the spirits of the forest, to Thomas's soul, to honor its fallen savior. The howl echoed through the valley, reverberating off the distant hills and into the hearts of those who stood listening. For a long moment, no one moved. The howl hung in the air like a spell, a bridge between the living and the dead, between the man and the wolf. The villagers felt a shift in the atmosphere, an undeniable sense that something profound had just happened. It was as if the wolf, in its own way, had sealed Thomas's spirit into the earth, ensuring that he would never truly be gone. After the howl faded into the distance, the wolf stood tall once more, its eyes glistening with something far beyond the ordinary. It was a creature of the wild, yet here it was, demonstrating more humanity, more respect, and more love than many humans ever would. The villagers, some of whom had grown uneasy at first, now felt a deep sense of peace. They had witnessed something rare, a moment of pure, undying loyalty. The wolf had given its final tribute, and it had done so with the grace and reverence of a creature who knew the depths of the bond it shared with the man it had called savior. Without another sound, the wolf turned and began to walk away, its head held high, its tail swishing behind it in the cool evening air. The villagers watched as it disappeared into the trees, its figure fading into the wilderness. And just like that, it was gone. But the memory of what they had witnessed lingered long after the wolf had vanished. It wasn't just a wolf at a funeral. It wasn't just a wild animal showing up out of curiosity. It was a creature who had loved, a creature who had known loss, and a creature who had given its final tribute in the most profound way it knew how. And the villagers would never forget it. As the last of the evening light disappeared behind the hills, a strange stillness fell over the village. The mourners had returned to their homes, the final sounds of the wolf's howl still echoing in their hearts. But for those who had witnessed the unusual scene at the grave, something remained in the air, something unspoken, yet deeply felt. The wolf's actions were more than just an animal's instinctual tribute. They were a testament to the bond it shared with Thomas. It had been more than a mere companion. It had been a protector, a silent guardian, and in return, Thomas had been its savior. The villagers began to whisper among themselves, recounting the events they had just witnessed. Some tried to dismiss it as nothing more than an animal's grief, but others knew deep down that what they had seen was something special, something beyond ordinary understanding. The bond between man and animal had always been a subject of fascination, but this was different. It was a reminder that loyalty and love weren't confined to the human world. And in the days that followed, the village began to change. They hadn't realized it at first, but the presence of the wolf had left an indelible mark on the community. The simple, small gestures they once took for granted, helping each other, offering kind words, offering a hand in times of need, began to grow stronger. The villagers had always cared for one another, but now with the knowledge of how deeply the wolf had cared for Thomas, they were beginning to truly understand what it meant to care for someone with your whole being. A few days after the funeral, something unusual happened. As the villagers gathered at the town square, a young boy, no older than 10, came running toward them, breathless and wide-eyed. "The wolf!" he gasped. "It's back! It's back in the forest!" The villagers exchanged wary glances. After witnessing the wolf's strange behavior at the grave, some had been concerned that the animal's presence might have been a one-time thing. But this news that the wolf had returned, was unexpected. The boy led the way, his small legs carrying him quickly through the streets until they reached the edge of the forest that bordered the village. And there, standing just beyond the tree line, was the wolf. It wasn't as if it had returned to the village. It was simply there, as if waiting for something. Its eyes were fixed on the villagers as they slowly approached, yet it didn't move. It was the same wolf that had stood guard over Thomas's grave, the same wolf that had performed its ritual. But now there was something different. The wolf didn't look like it was mourning. It looked like it was watching, waiting. Its gaze held an intensity that spoke of wisdom, a wisdom beyond human understanding. The villagers, still unsure of what to make of it, stood in silence. Some took a step forward, others remained at the edge of the clearing. It was almost as if the wolf was allowing them to come closer, but not daring them to touch it. It was a creature of the wild after all, and yet it had shown them something else, something that defied the natural order of things. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the wolf took one final look at the villagers, its gaze softening slightly, as if acknowledging them for the first time. And then without a sound it turned and began to walk deeper into the forest. It was as though it had come to fulfill its purpose, and now that it had done so, it was leaving. The villagers didn't chase after it. They didn't need to. They knew in that moment that the wolf's purpose was complete. It had paid its final tribute, not just to Thomas, but to the village itself. And just as the wolf disappeared into the trees, a strange calm settled over the village, one that stayed long after it had gone. The villagers returned to their homes, but the events of the past few days would stay with them forever. They had been witness to something far greater than a wolf's tribute. They had seen what true loyalty and love could do, what they could inspire. Over time, the story of the wolf at the funeral, the ritual it had performed, and the message it had left behind would become a legend in the village. And though they would never fully understand the connection between man and animal that had played out before them, they would always remember the lesson it had taught them, that sometimes love transcends all boundaries, even those between species. Weeks passed since the wolf had left the village, but its impact remained, like a ghost lingering in the hearts of the villagers. They began to speak of it in hushed tones, sharing stories of how the wolf had somehow changed them, reminding them of the power of loyalty, love, and selfless sacrifice. It wasn't just the wolf's tribute that had moved them. It was the unspoken lesson it had left behind. Something had shifted in the village, a quiet change that no one could quite explain, but everyone could feel. People were kinder to one another. Small gestures of help, an extra loaf of bread for a neighbor, a hand offered to carry heavy baskets, became the norm. It was as though the village, which had once been a place of simple living, had been awakened to something deeper. They had witnessed the extraordinary, and in the process, they had begun to live it. Elders spoke of the old ways, the ancient connections between humans and nature, the bond that animals shared with the earth. Some said the wolf had been sent by the spirits, a guardian of nature, to remind them of their duty to protect each other and the world around them. Others believed the wolf had been a messenger, sent to show them how to honor those they loved, even in death. No one could say for sure why the wolf had appeared at the funeral, or why it had chosen that moment to perform its strange ritual. But one thing was certain, it had left a legacy. The village began to grow, but it did so quietly, rooted in the values that had been revived by the wolf's visit. The farmers grew their crops with greater care, understanding that their work was a gift. The children learned to respect the world around them, to see the beauty in the smallest things, like the dew on the morning grass or the way the birds sang at dawn. The animals of the village, cats, dogs, horses, and even the livestock, seemed to sense the change. There was a quiet harmony among them, as if the animals too understood what had passed between the wolf and the villagers. Months later, as the seasons shifted from the warmth of summer to the crisp chill of fall, a stranger arrived in the village. He was a traveler, a man of few words, with an old weathered coat and a deep, thoughtful gaze. He came quietly into the village square, observing the people with a kind of knowing look, as if he had been expecting something. One afternoon, as the traveler sat at the local inn, nursing a mug of warm tea, an elder approached him. The man's face was familiar. He had been one of the first to witness the wolf's tribute at the funeral, and his presence had always seemed to carry a weight of wisdom. "You've come for something," the elder said, his voice calm but piercing. The traveler looked up slowly, meeting the elder's eyes. "I have," he replied. "I've come to find what the wolf left behind." The elder nodded slightly, as if he had known this moment was coming. The wolf left behind more than just a memory. It left behind a message, and it's a message that continues to grow deep in the heart of this village. The traveler's eyes narrowed slightly. What message? The elder leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. The wolf taught us something profound, something that can't be fully understood by those who haven't felt its presence. It taught us that we must never forget the bonds that tie us, not just to each other, but to all living things. It reminded us of the strength of loyalty and the power of love, especially in moments of loss. The traveler sat back, his eyes distant, as if he was reflecting on the elder's words. But why did it come? Why did it leave the way it did? Because, the elder continued, the wolf knew it had to leave the same way it had arrived, quietly with no expectation of gratitude, no need for acknowledgement. It gave everything it had, and it left when its work was done. That is the way of all things. The traveler's gaze drifted outside, as if the village itself held the answers he sought. And what now? The elder smiled faintly. Now the village has its lesson. The wolf has returned to the wild, but its spirit is here in the hearts of the people. We live differently now, and that's the gift we've been given, living with purpose, love, and a deep respect for the world around us. The traveler nodded slowly, as if he understood. I see. And with that, he stood up, placing his mug down on the table. He didn't speak again, but as he turned to leave, he seemed to carry something new within him, a quiet understanding, a connection to the village, into the memory of the wolf. The legacy of that mysterious animal was not just a story to be told, but a way of life to be lived. As the traveler disappeared into the horizon, the villagers went on with their daily routines, carrying with them the lessons the wolf had imparted. The animal's visit had been short, but its impact would last forever. For those who had witnessed it, the lesson was clear. Loyalty, love, and the memory of the ones we have lost would never truly leave. They lived on in every act of kindness, every word of comfort, and every quiet moment shared between those who cared for one another. The seasons continued to change, and the village, now altered by the wolf's visit, settled into a rhythm of quiet growth. The air felt different, thicker with meaning, as though each passing day carried with it the lessons of the past. The wolf's legacy had taken root in the hearts of the villagers, but it wasn't something they spoke of often. Instead, it was woven into the fabric of their lives, visible in the way they cared for one another, in the way they worked the land, and in the quiet respect they gave to nature and the creatures that shared their world. Years passed, and while the memory of the wolf remained strong, the village began to prosper in ways that were both subtle and profound. People came from nearby towns to visit, curious about the transformation that had taken place. They spoke of the kindness that radiated from the villagers, of the respect they had for life, for each other, and for the earth. It was clear that the wolf's visit had sparked something deep within them, something that couldn't be replicated or explained, but that would always be a part of the village's soul. Then one crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky filled with hues of orange and purple, a familiar sight returned to the village. A figure stood at the edge of the woods just beyond the village square. It was an old man, with a weathered face and eyes that held the wisdom of a lifetime. His presence was quiet, but his energy carried a deep sense of calm. The villagers gathered slowly, drawn to him, sensing that he had come for something important. The elder who had spoken to the traveler years ago was among them, his heart recognizing the figure before him. "You've come back," the elder said softly, his voice filled with respect. The old man nodded. "I have. I've come to see how you've lived with the lessons you were given, to see if you've honored the wolf spirit." The villagers stood silent, waiting for the old man to speak further. They had all been touched by the memory of the wolf, and now they wondered what the man had to say. "I was there on that day when the wolf came to your village," the old man continued, "and I saw what it did, the way it showed its loyalty, and how it left you with something more valuable than any treasure. But I came today to ask, how have you lived with it? How has it shaped you?" The villagers exchanged glances, and the elder stepped forward. "We live differently now," he said, his voice steady and clear. "The wolf showed us that there is more to life than simply existing. It taught us that we must honor the bonds we share with each other, with nature, and with the creatures who walk beside us. We don't just live in the village anymore. We live with purpose. Every decision we make, every action, we do so with respect and love. The old man's eyes softened as he heard the elder's words. He smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, as if he had been waiting for this moment. You've honored its spirit, the old man said. You've learned the true meaning of loyalty, love, and respect. And that is all the wolf could have hoped for. It came to teach you, and now you carry its legacy forward. But remember, this isn't the end. This is the beginning. Live with the lessons you've learned, and let them guide you through the rest of your days. With that, the old man turned and began to walk toward the woods. The villagers watched as he disappeared into the trees, his figure fading into the shadows. It was as though he had been sent to remind them of the path they were meant to walk, the path that led them to a future full of compassion and understanding. As the sun set and the village returned to its peaceful routine, the memory of the wolf lived on. It wasn't a tale to be told in passing. It was a way of life, embedded in the hearts of those who had witnessed the extraordinary bond between man and beast. The village would always remember the day the wolf had stood guard over their savior's grave, and how, through its simple act of loyalty, it had changed them all forever. The wolf had left the village, but its spirit remained, a constant reminder of the power of love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between those who truly care. And so, the village continued, its people living with purpose, their hearts guided by the silent, steady presence of a wolf that had taught them more than they could ever have imagined.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.